Good afternoon, guys. It is a cloudy day here in usually sunny upstate South Carolina, and today we are going to take a look at not just how pretty the garden is, but we're also going to have a talk about the weather. I know I've been talking a lot about the drought this year and how that has affected my crops, and I wanted to talk to you guys about kind of what's been causing that drought and what I expect the weather to be like next year. I feel like the camera really does not do all these flowers justice. Just the sheer size of them and how many of them there are. All the way into the winter, these will be blooming. Before we talk about the weather, let's start with the tour. So coming over to my scarlet runner beans, I started noticing that I actually have a few beans now, and it's not a lot, but it's better than the 2 I've had all season. I'm kind of suspecting that the cooler weather has helped, although the distinct lack of rain definitely has slowed them down. Definitely been getting some, so I'm happy with that. And since this is a perennial, I'm really excited to see what it'll do next year when it comes back. Hopefully it will have more resources to access. Here on the tomato trellis row, my purple pole beans are still going strong. I haven't been picking very many of them fresh, mostly because it being a little drier out means that they're just a little dehydrated, although they are still making good dried beans for me in some cases. Like, you can kind of see the difference between this pod here and this one here. This one doesn't really have good beans in it, but this one does. This one looks great, actually. And so just depending on how much actual water they got while they were developing, some of them will actually develop on the inside and some of them won't. But they are a lot to be keeping up eating fresh, and I do like having the dried beans later anyway. So really it's just nice that I can come out here anytime and find a couple that are fresh and just not even worry about the rest until later. I had talked about tearing out some of this tomatoes. It's still on the list, but you know, I am very busy, and a lot of times things like this do fall off my list, and I hope you can take that as encouragement for yourself, that you don't necessarily have to be on top of things all the time. Like, I'm still getting tomatoes from these, and they're actually looking better because I think the leaf-footed bugs have moved on and they're not putting as much pressure on the tomatoes now. I definitely do have plans to plant some more of the fall stuff in here once, you know, I get around to pulling out these tomatoes that are not quite producing like they used to. Although I'm just still going to take advantage of everything I can get from them in the meantime. Let's walk along here and look for anything interesting. Lots of weeds down here. Lots of weeds here. So much grass. That's a beautiful tomato just hanging out in the grass there. And here's that fava bean. I think it's the only one that came up. I haven't seen any others, and it's already been broken. It's kind of barely hanging on right there. I definitely need to do some more planting of this area. Just look at these. These are absolutely gorgeous little tomatoes. Here at the front of the second row, let's check in on our eggplant. Oh, this one here feels like it is probably overripe. I probably should have picked that sooner. Let's see if I can get it. Definitely getting an eggplant here and there. Not just a ton, but you know, better than I had expected. Oh, look at that. That's a lettuce seedling. It's a good time of year for that to come up. I'll probably let that stay. It's right next to this lavender that has been hiding out here all year. Next spring, when it comes back, it will have a lot more sun, and I'm expecting it to grow quite a bit. We'll see. Now the sweet peppers over here, let's see, this one is just laying straight on the ground. Oh yep, something's gotten to it. It's the only downside of having your peppers actually touching the ground is little ground critters usually get to them when that happens. I'm just going to leave that there. We've got this beautiful red one right here. Oh, and that took half a branch with it. And a little jumping spider friend. Hi. I turned around to put this in the basket and Draco is over here absolutely begging for attention. He knows he's so cute. I literally can't resist. So as I was saying before, the zinnias will keep blooming all the way up until the frost kills them. They just keep splitting and keep creating more blooms. They've survived the drought. They are still beautiful. I haven't even deadheaded these at all in order to make them keep blooming. They just keep doing this. And they've provided a lot of good structure for the peppers in the areas where they are. In this area where they're not, you can see there's more peppers kind of leaning over from the weight of their own fruit. So I think I'm going to probably continue with this interplanting of zinnias and peppers just because it's gorgeous, and it also is such a good living scaffolding for my peppers. Some of the peas that I planted in this area have already started flowering. This one flowered a couple days ago, and you can see the flowers all closed up and might even make a pod. We've got this big vine here, and this one, oh, that is all one. Haven't seen any flowers on this bigger one yet, but if you look closely, you'll see quite a few little pea plants right in here. It could definitely use more, like way more, but given the fact that I stuck seeds in the ground and hoped for the best in the middle of a drought, I'm pretty impressed with what actually has come up. You can see how well that scaffolding worked in here with the hot peppers. Definitely these zinnias are part of the overall support structure, but also planting these pretty close together has allowed them to lean on each other, and overall I think that's been pretty good. You know, it definitely looks a little bit crowded in here, but nothing is like flopping and falling over the way that it was last year. And as you saw, keeping these fruits off the ground is pretty important. So I am very happy with the way that hot peppers have turned out this year. And we've still got about 4 more weeks until the frost, maybe 5 if we're lucky. So I'm going to keep on letting these ripen as many peppers as they can. So back here where I had tried to plant out some brassicas and they got eaten, I have tried yet another thing. I mixed together a bunch of different lettuce seeds and just like literally put them in a salt shaker and sprinkled them all over the soil here. Kind of mixed them in, and I've been watering as much as I can, although sometimes I'm away and I can't. But I am seeing a lot of little sprouts. I am not entirely sure how many of them are weeds, but we will see as they get older. So part of my experiment that I did here though is this area I very carefully cleared and have been kind of babying, and then I took my little salt shaker and I shook some more in here over the tops of the hot peppers, and I am just curious to see how many actual seedlings will come out of this area that is kind of left to fend for itself versus this very tended area. I still haven't cut down the corn yet. That is on my list of things to do. And I actually bought some seedlings to put in this area since all of my brassicas got eaten immediately. I think they were too small when I put them in. I will have to think about that next year and make sure that they're bigger. I went and bought a couple of packs of larger brassica seedlings, and I think I will put them in this area and maybe into this area as I'm pulling out these sweet peppers, which definitely did not produce as much as I had hoped this year. You know, these were not the stunted ones, and they're still only performing about on par with the ones that I planted that were stunted. If you saw the video that I put out about the microscopy of my soil, I have recently found out that I could use a lot more mycorrhizal fungi in my soil. So I'm going to be inoculating with that pretty soon, and I am also very excited to see where this garden can go once I have all of the proper support structures in place. If you haven't heard me talk about mycorrhizal fungi before, they are an entire group of fungi that interacts with plant roots, and they basically form these networks in between different plants, and the fungi are out there growing and mining a bunch of nutrients, and they're exchanging them to plants in exchange for the sugars that the plants are photosynthesizing. And so it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. Everybody gets what they want, and everybody's healthier for it. So even though my soil is great in a lot of ways, these plants are not as connected to each other as they could be, and also not as connected to the other nutrients in the soil that are probably there for them, just waiting. If we check on the cucumbers on this trellis, you can see things have gone pretty bad pretty fast. The cucumbers are mostly giving up. This one looks like it's trying to make another little one. But I've had these plants, this didn't even fully develop before they started rotting. You can see this vine here, absolutely destroyed. And I am not sure entirely what caused that. It can't be just simple lack of water. I'm thinking it's more likely a pathogen of some sort, either bacterial or fungal. But right now I'm not fully sure. Luckily, as we'll see in a moment, I have some beautiful cucumber vines coming up in another area of the garden. Noodle bean trellis. I think it looks even more sad than it did last week. And yet I can come out here and find noodle beans of every stage out here. Fully dried up, partially dry, and new, about the right size to eat, or even smaller. These just keep going. They keep on going. If you haven't tried noodle beans in your garden, I do highly recommend them. They're so productive and so cool looking. Alright, let's take a quick look at this final row over here. I don't always touch on it because it is the least taken care of and planted. I have a few of my rogue tomatoes over here that have been producing a few beautiful tomatoes all year. The leaf-footed bugs never got to these ones. They were planted late, and they're also in this shady area, so I'm not sure which of those factors has to do with them not getting noticed by the bugs. You can see I've let some of these weeds go absolutely nuts. This is American burnweed right in front of me, and yeah, I should be taking these out. They're definitely going to seed, and that is going to be all over here. What else do I have in here? Mostly wild strawberries. These are false wild strawberries, which is why I wish they weren't here. They take over everything, and they don't even make an edible fruit. But for now, they are acting as really good ground cover, and I guess I'm not mad about that. Back near the back of the row, I cleared a second area for lettuce seedlings. This has a lot more sprouts in it, but I don't know yet if that's just more weed seeds were here or if the shade is doing a better job keeping the soil moist so that things can actually sprout. That one looks like a brassica seedling right there. Some of these do look like weeds to me, but I'm not quite as familiar with lettuce seedlings, so I'll have to wait for them to start getting true leaves before I start pulling out the weeds. But definitely a lot more sprouts in this section versus that section. Before we go on to the other section of the garden, these are the new babies that I bought to plant. I think I have one pack of Brussels sprouts and another pack of cabbages. And then over here are my seedlings, which I was hoping to wait to get larger before I planted them, but I don't think they're going to get any bigger in these cells. So I think I need to go ahead and put them out. I have some cabbages here, kohlrabi, more Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, and kale. And I think I might have waited just a little too long. Oh, hello. That's a caterpillar. I think I might have waited too long to put these out just because I think they might be stunting at this point. I thought they would get bigger. They did not. And that's not a good sign. So I'll still put them out. They'll probably all get eaten, but maybe a couple of them will make it. Over here in the raised section of the garden, can we first take a second to appreciate all these little blue flowers coming up in the weeds? They're on this plant, which I haven't properly identified for myself yet, but it's always so pretty. I don't like pulling it out because it doesn't seem to be that much of a nuisance. It definitely can spread out a little bit, but it's not unmanageably spreading the way that like those strawberries are, or Bermuda grass does. So I leave it in the spots where I can. I do think it's pretty. But I do want to take you over here and show you my carrot experiment. This is the absolute laziest way to plant carrots, and I am really curious to see how it turns out. You can see I had these seed heads. I had taken most of the seeds off of them, I thought. I could tell there was a couple, but I was not expecting there to be this many. And I laid them all down face down on the soil, kept it watered. A lot of stuff has sprouted, and I'm going to just not move anything. I'm going to give it no tending other than water. Some of them have fallen over, and I've just kind of let them stay there. If you want to see how this turns out, come back in 5 or 6 weeks, and we should have some really good updates. I just saw these on the wall, and if you've never seen these before, these are egg sacs for those yellow garden spiders that are all over my garden with the squiggle in their web. I'm definitely going to leave these be over the winter. I think they should hatch in the spring, if I'm correct. Yeah, I like having these guys around. I think they're really good partners for the garden. These are the cucumber vines I was telling you about. They are starting to go absolutely crazy. There are 3 different vines in here. And look at the size of these leaves compared to what was over there in the ground. These have access to the actual amount of water that they need. I think that's the biggest difference. Definitely the ones in the ground I left to struggle with the drought that we've been going through. And these are in this self-watering container that I am in the middle of reviewing. And there's a couple of peas in there that got shaded out a lot faster than I expected. But I haven't had to refill the water in this since basically I planted these guys. I kept the top bit of soil moist by just misting it a little bit for a few days while these were sprouting. And then after I felt like, they had gotten big enough to have a root to reach down to the reservoir, I stopped watering them. And oh my goodness, there's a teeny tiny baby green aioli on that leaf. Oh, look how cute that is. Anoli, not aioli. Aioli is a sauce. Oh, look at him. Hi, little buddy. I'm so glad you found a home. Anyway, yeah, I haven't had to refill this reservoir in the whole time that these have been growing, and I'm very happy with that. You know, this as a place to grow cucumbers, especially since it comes with the trellis, I'm feeling pretty positive about at the moment. I want to show you guys some of the other stuff that we've been following. It's very new growth. I mean, these carrots were planted only, I would say, a week or two before the other ones that we saw in the experiment section. And you know, once they start getting their true leaves, that's when the growth can really kick off in kind of an exponential way, because the more leaves they have, the more energy they can make to then grow more leaves to make more energy, etc. So these are really taking off. I have thinned them out a little bit, probably not as much as would be recommended, but you know, I found I didn't have the heart to do a whole lot of it, and I also was just a little worried about disturbing the roots of some of these that were so close together. So yeah, we've got sections of dense planting, and I think over here it just kind of happened to be better spaced out, and over here. And you can see already that even though some of these areas looked a little patchy, it's definitely going to fill in pretty well. Similar story with this raised bed. Some of these plants are growing so fast, I can't even believe it. Like this beet right here, good gracious. Like it's like a full plant now, all of a sudden, instead of just a little baby seedling. And then this one next to it, same type, planted at the same exact time, not nearly as big. Isn't that so interesting? There's so much variability in the size of these plants, and I would say the soil beneath them is largely homogeneous, but not fully. And there's also some baby carrots in here now. I filled in some of the gaps with some of my home-saved oxheart carrot seeds. But you can even still see, like this little baby here, just now getting its first true leaf. There's some others, like this little one coming up. Also more carrots in here. It's just so crazy to see the variability of size in all of these plants, you know, because I feel like some of them have been seedlings way longer, and then others just absolutely popped up and started growing like, you know, they actually had enough nutrients. It's so hard to say why that might be. They're all getting the same amount of water, and I mean, even looking at stuff that is literally right next to each other, you would think that they would have similar amounts of nutrients. So I don't know, but I'm gonna keep watching it and trying to learn something. Okay, now I just noticed something that I think is very interesting. I'm not sure what it is yet, but I just glanced over here and I saw all these little sprouts, and I was like, wow, those look a lot like carrot sprouts. And some of the leaves coming up look like carrot leaves. And I'm like, I did not plant carrots in here. I definitely threw these acorn shells in here, but those are not acorn babies, and these should not have enough of a seed left to even sprout. So I don't know, I'll keep checking on these. Maybe some carrot seeds blew in here somehow or dropped off the porch, or I don't know. Very interesting. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and take you guys inside to talk about the weather, because even though it looks dark and cloudy out here, it is still so humid and hot. Like I feel the sweat just dripping off of me. Okay, I am in the process of cooling down. I've got my holy basil hibiscus tea, and let's talk about the weather. Normally that's very boring, but I really like to nerd out about stuff, so I have been kind of going down rabbit holes about the weather and like larger weather patterns, and you know, trying to learn more about what sorts of signs there are that people who predict the weather are looking for, and like the larger patterns across our country. And in the process of that, I started learning about El Nino and La Nina. You might have heard of these, you might have only heard of El Nino, but essentially what that is the warming or cooling of the oceans off the west coast of South America. So that is off of the larger part of South America that kind of sticks out. Oh, hi Draco. Draco has decided that he wants to sit with me. All right, so the warming or the cooling of that bit of ocean can be really influencing on the weather patterns of the entire rest of the world, which is why people have been so keyed into studying these ocean temperatures. And this past year, we have been in the middle of an El Nino, and the strength of that can vary. It really depends on how far from average the ocean temperatures are. And El Nino is when the ocean temperatures are warmer than average. And so what that does simply to the overall global weather is it changes your weather patterns to be kind of opposite of what they would normally be. So if you normally live in a really dry place, then during an El Nino, expect a lot of rain. California, for example, got a lot of rain this year. And then here, where we are, where it's normally very, very wet, we got very little rain this year. And I tend to think my area is worse than like the surrounding areas because of the lakes. And I've told you guys this theory of mine, but I watch weather patterns come in, I watch storms come in, and they hit the lakes in the area. There's so many lakes in the area. But they hit the one that's directly between me and where the storms come from, and they break apart, go around the lake, go around me, and then come back together after they've passed. So I think the drought has been a little bit worse here than in other areas like Greenville, for example. I know people who live in Greenville are like, oh, there's a drought. I feel like it rains all the time. So that is El Nino. And then La Nina is the opposite. That is a cooling of ocean temperatures below average in that area off of South America. And that is more indicative of an intensification of your standard weather pattern. So if it's dry where you live, it will be even drier. If it's wet where you live, it will be even wetter, etc. Are you done? Okay. So we have recently switched, or we will switch very soon, according to people who know more than I do, that we are switching from El Nino, a strong El Nino, to a La Nina, and the strength of that is, to be seen, and the predictions on that are going to change every day until we get there. But it's predicted that the switch will happen very soon, this month, next month. Coming into the winter, we are going to be in La Nina instead of El Nino. And it doesn't always have to be one or the other. It can be neutral. It can be average ocean temperatures there. Like there's a reason there's an average. And then weather patterns would be average. They would be normal. But we are switching immediately. Sorry, I have cat hair all over my face now. We are switching immediately from El Nino to La Nina. And that does sometimes happen, but it's a little bit more uncommon. So going into the winter and this spring at least, I am expecting my normal weather of lots of rain to be intensified. And I'm very looking forward to that just because we were in a drought. But also one of the downsides of that is that if you get too much water at one time, it's really hard for the soil to soak it up. And that's where a lot of these areas this year might have seen flooding because there's a lot of rain happening in areas that aren't used to it, aren't equipped for it. There's not a lot of places for it to soak into the soil. And so if you guys have been following me, you know that I have dug a swale, which is like essentially a ditch with a hill on the downhill side to slow down the water coming down my hill towards the garden. And this works fairly well. I've dug it deeper since I first dug it, and it works pretty well, except for during the most intense storms where it fills up and then the water runs over and across the garden anyway. But there's only so deep I can go. And it works most of the time. So I think it's probably fine the way it is. It slows down the water and then gives it the time to sit there and actually sink into the soil rather than running all the way off into the street, into the drainage, and not benefiting me at all. Knowing that it's going to be a wetter spring gives me a lot of hope for a lot of these perennials that I have seen really struggle through this really dry, hot summer that we've had. Spring is definitely the time when all of these plants are going to be growing the fastest. They're going to be establishing more roots, establishing more foliage, and I'm hoping that that will get them kind of settled for, you know, whether or not this weather pattern shifts in some way again. And also springtime, it's going to be really good to know ahead of time that extra rain is coming. It's going to help me like mentally prepare for it and also make any physical preparations that I might want to make. I could decide to dig my swale deeper if I felt like it was necessary, or I could decide to dig a second one. I might have to give that some thought. Just, I can't dig the current one any deeper, I think, because I start hitting stone and I cannot dig through that. And I'm not going to rent the equipment to dig through that. But that's beside the point. The point I really wanted to make, that I've been rambling for a while now, is that learning about weather as a gardener is not just about paying attention to temperature swings. It's also about paying attention to larger weather patterns and how they're going to influence your garden year over year and month over month. And I think learning about how the weather works on a larger scale will help you tune into some of these patterns that start happening and have a better sense of what to do and how to handle and prepare for the changing weather patterns ahead of time. And all that being said, I know there's still so much out there for me to learn. I am definitely not a weather expert. I love consuming content and learning a lot of stuff, and I think there's no reason not to learn everything you can about everything that you can. But I also recognize that I'm never going to know everything. And so I want to recommend to you a couple of resources to go learn even more about the weather from people who know way more than me. I will link those down below. If you aren't quite caught up on the garden tours, I will go ahead and link the playlist of them up here. And I will see you next week for yet another garden tour. But until then, I wish you very happy gardening.